So we started the series last week. It's called Nineveh, all right? Eventually, we will reach the story of Jonah. That's where this whole thing started, with this idea of I wanted to teach through Jonah. I realized as I sat with Wayne Livingston, he's one of our reps from the SBTC, the Southern Baptist of Texas Convention. And we kind of sat down, I was looking at some sermons, and I said, I've never preached through the book of Jonah. And he looked at me like I was a crazy person. He said, you've never taught through Jonah? And I said, no, I've taught through Ezekiel and Habakkuk. I never taught through Jonah. And so that's where this started, and it kind of morphed into this bigger idea as I went deeper and deeper into this story. But I see so much as I look at the idea and the placement and everything of Nineveh. I see so much of our present reality, our world that we live in. And we talked about this last week, that we live in a spiritual Nineveh. That we live in a land that is opposed, and in a world at large that's opposed to the work of God. So we celebrated last week, if you remember, in a couple of states that they passed some, or they intended or voted on some very restrictive abortion laws. Well, today, if you've been listening to the radio, they've talked about how a couple of federal judges have promised we're going to block that. We're going to stop that legislation. And so we live in a world that when we protect life, our leadership says, no, we're not going to do that. We want abortion on demand until the end of the day. Today, I had to write a personal wedding policy. So that's for myself. When somebody asks if I would officiate their wedding, I had to write a policy that outlines who I will not marry. And it's a legal document that I have to have notarized and in my file saying I will not perform a same-sex wedding. I will not do this. And so we live in a world where we have to have those documents. We live in a world where somebody called it the world of the perpetually outraged. So people are just constantly offended and outraged against everything. Unless you're Christian, then you're not allowed to be. If you are, then you're deemed a bigot or a racist. And so we're going to look at this because I think what God is doing in this world goes beyond just us gathering in churches, worshiping, and going home. And I feel like that's what a lot of people have kind of boiled Christianity down to. I go into my holy huddle, and I'm protected in the walls of this building. Literally, we have a guy running security, walking around making sure that nothing is happening around our building. But spiritually, we like these kind of huddles because we feel safe here. There's not anybody in this room probably that's going to disagree with us politically, religiously. We may disagree on a couple of little things, but we feel safe in this room. But when we go out into Nineveh, right, it's a different world, isn't it? I mean, you can't say anything anymore without offending someone. So we talked about living in this world, what God is doing in this world, because we prayed tonight. You realize what we're doing. We're declaring our neediness as a people. We're declaring the fact that we don't have answers to these questions. So whoever prayed, somebody prayed, Bill, I think it was you prayed about the kids that have leukemia. Mm-hmm. And you said something, it really hit me, that this shouldn't happen. And God looks and says, you're right. It shouldn't happen. In the world that I created, it was perfect. It was sinless. It was thornless. There was no medical problems. There was no issues like that. But we brought this in with our sin. And so I look at this, and it's very easy to look and say, God, it's getting so bad. Why don't you just take us? I mean, and to a certain degree, we do pray that. Maranatha, Lord, come quickly. Come rescue us. But some people, and I've even asked this, Lord, how about when we get saved, you just take us right to heaven? That would be a great reality for me. And then somebody mentioned, I forgot who was last week mentioned, but then the people who get saved as children, right, they would never have their children who would be saved as well. So we would break the line. But I look at this and I think, so we live in a scary world, but we've got to recognize this constantly, that God is not done. He is working as much as He did in the Old Testament. He is working today. And we say, well, we don't see miracles, and we don't see the crazy, amazing, we don't see the pillar of fire and the pillar of smoke. Well, the truth is we have something better than that. We have the physical, personal presence of the Holy Spirit in our hearts. You imagine the people that we're going to talk about throughout this series, Jonah, Nahum, the prophets, all these people, they longed to experience what we experience today. They went to the temple in order to fulfill obligations, in order to find and feel and see the presence of God. At any moment of any day, you and I can open our hearts and just say, Lord, and as soon as we say that word, we're in the presence of God. Isn't that amazing? He says, come boldly before my throne. I love this. So God is working. He's redeeming. He is moving. He is doing these things, and he plants us in our Nineveh in order to accomplish that purpose, accomplish his purpose. So we're going to look at this. That's the spiritual side of the study. Today I want to give some background to the physical Nineveh, the real city of Nineveh that actually physically existed. Because sometimes we have a tendency, and I'm going to talk about this as we move on in the series, we have a tendency to read the Bible like an allegory. Like we read it and then immediately we say, now how does that apply to me? Like, so there's Jonah, so is it that I'm that disobedient prophet? Like we immediately spiritualize it, but we need to see that it was originally written as a narrative. I mean, this was a real city that really happened. We're going to look at it. I know you guys all can't see the wonderful map, but we're going to look at this a little bit. So let's look at this. Let's talk about this city of Nineveh. And answer things like, when was it founded? Who founded it? Did it actually exist? Is it a real city? Okay, and that'll give you guys a clue as to how I study and interpret the Bible, because I study and interpret the Bible literally. It is a literal book unless otherwise stated. Okay, so that's important when we go into Jonah, and I didn't realize how many people believe that this is not a true story until you start studying this. I don't understand it. But let's keep going. So how did it become such a powerful city? And then why did God allow it to be used in such an oppressive way? Not impressive, oppressive way toward his people. So those are the questions I want to ask. And then for our Nineveh, how can we engage and love people the way that God loves people in this world? That's kind of what I'm going to look. I'm going to look at my notes because sometimes I have notes that I don't hit on. Okay, so story of Nineveh. Where do you think it starts? In Jonah? Genesis, good. All right, so we're going to go all the way back, almost to the beginning of the Bible, the book of Genesis. We're going to go into chapter 9. So go with me to Genesis chapter 9. You say, how on earth? Nineveh wasn't around that long, and it was. We just have to read it. We're going to start at the very, very, very beginning of the story of Nineveh. So we know the story of Noah, right? I know that this is a series about Jonah, but we're also going to talk about Noah. The story of Noah. God asked Noah to do something. What did he ask him to do? Build an ark. Build an ark. Which was strange because it had never rained. They didn't know in that period, in that place that he lived, he wouldn't have needed a boat because there were no large bodies of water within any kind of distance of him. And so he asked them to do this. And how about this? Look at the difference between Noah and Jonah, right? What did Noah say to the Lord?
He did it.
He did it. He just did it. What did Jonah do? He ran away. We're going to talk about that next week. We're going to get into it. Eventually we'll reach Jonah. So we're going to look at this. So Noah, he had just survived the most cataclysmic thing that the world had ever experienced and will ever experience until the tribulation that we read about in the book of Revelation. He had described this worldwide, and yes, I believe it was a worldwide, literal flood that covered the entire earth. He and his family survived, and they stepped out of the ark and began to rebuild civilization. Can you imagine that moment? You step out, you breathe air for the clean air, relatively clean air for the first time since you had been in there for however long you had been in there, right? Because you imagine all those animals and everything. It probably didn't smell too great in there. He steps out into this new world, and there's, 8 people left? Noah, his wife, his 3 kids and their wives. Did you guys watch the Noah movie that came out a few years ago? Good. Don't look at it. It's horrible. The story is very strange. They love to take the ideas of biblical stories and just mangle them. Yeah. Although preachers do that too, so we got to be careful about that. So he steps out of the ark. One of the first things that he does, we read about in chapter 9, verse 20. It says, Noah, as a man of the soil, began by planting a vineyard. All right, up until that point, has anything wrong happened? It's not. Is it wrong to plant a vineyard? Good, okay, it's not wrong. But then we get to verse 21, and then it starts to go downhill. Verse 21, he drank some of the wine, became drunk, and uncovered himself inside his tent. This just shows us we got to understand, even though Noah and his ark is a picture of Christ and his salvation, right? Noah was a man, he was human, and he was sinful. I never understood this story growing up because God had just used Noah in a huge way, and then Noah just falls flat on his face like, what is going on? Why would he do this? Now, some historians believe that Noah's wife died, and that's why he drank in his grief, and that his nakedness was involved in some kind of promiscuity. We don't know. We don't know that. But we know what happens. Alcohol obviously takes away your ability to make good decisions, and that's what happened in this situation. But that's not who this is about, because next you see in verse 22, Ham, the father of Canaan, one of Noah's sons, saw his father naked and told his two brothers outside. He's making fun. He's making a spectacle of this. He's using this as an opportunity to poke fun at his father, to avoid having to pay reverence to his father. He looks at him and says, you're just like everybody else. Right? All those people that died in the flood, you're just as sinful and wicked as they were. He's making fun of them. Do his brothers play along in this? No, they don't. In verse 23, then Shem and Japheth took a cloak, placed it over both their shoulders, and walking backward, they covered their father's nakedness. Their faces were turned away, and they did not see their father naked. So they proved themselves faithful to the Lord, and through one of these family lines, eventually we see Christ come through this godly family line. But this is a moment, because this is really important. You're like, how does this have to do with Nineveh? We're going to get there, I promise. We're going to connect the dots. Because what happens immediately after? Noah wakes up, it says in verse 24, when Noah awoke from his drinking, he sobered up, right? He learned what his youngest son had done, and what did he do? Verse 25. He cursed him. He cursed his son. Verse 25, he said, Canaan is cursed. He's just saying, your lineage, your prodigy, your sons, your family line from here on is cursed. He will be the lowest of slaves to his brothers. That is a curse. In that day and age, that especially, to curse your family line, to be a slave to your brother. How many of you guys had brothers and sisters growing up? How about older brothers and sisters? Okay, this is almost one of the worst things. You already basically are slaves to your older brothers and sisters. They treat you like garbage, right? And don't watch this, Matt and Mike. But that's why my parents had one more after me, so that I could be the slave master to another one, right? But seriously, the things that he said, that had to be absolutely searingly, breakingly painful for Ham to hear. Him say, you're basically, you're cursed, you're not one of my sons anymore. And he also said in verse 26, blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem. Let Canaan be Shem's slave. Let God extend Japheth. Let Japheth dwell in the tents of Shem. Let Canaan be Shem's slave. He's saying, I'm cursing you and I'm blessing your brothers. And so all this happens. All this happens here in the end of chapter 9, and then at the last verse, Noah lived 350 years after the flood. So he was able to witness what we're about to read. He's able to witness the extent of this. This wasn't like a deathbed curse. It's not like he cursed him and then died. It says here that he lived 350 years after the flood, so Noah's life lasted 950 years. He missed the Guinness World Record by 13 years. Isn't that crazy? If he lived just a little bit longer, he would have beaten Methuselah. But 950 years, then he died.
Shouldn't have got drunk that night.
Sorry?
Shouldn't have gotten drunk that night.
That's right, he shouldn't have. And maybe he would have lived. Yeah, maybe he would have broken the record had this not happened. That's amazing. I love to think about that. So now I want to look at this story, because imagine this is you. This is Ham. You're in this brave new world. Your family is starting to expand. He's had at least one son at this point. He makes one mistake, right? Both Noah and Ham made mistakes, but Ham's mistake was a lot more costly, because now his family has been cursed. And he looks. Can you imagine what he's feeling in this moment? Let's just throw some things around. I know we're speaking out of the Bible, but I want to really deeply understand what we're about to read. What would you feel had your father said, your brothers and sisters are blessed and you are cursed? Anger. I'd feel constant resentment. I couldn't even look at my brothers at that moment. I would say I came to rejection. Well, let me show you what Ham did, because that curse did not sit well with him. He would spend the rest of his life and every generation that came after him fighting to reverse that curse. So we're going to read Genesis 10, 1 through 20. we're going to read those few. The blanks so far, if you've been following, Ham is the first one. Ham came in, saw him, mocked him. And then as a result, the second blank is cursed. Noah cursed his son. All right, so Ham, look at where he went, because this is going to be the story that's going to set up the rest of the Old Testament. I've heard a lot of people say, why are genealogies in the Bible? Like, what do they have to do with the story? If we miss this genealogy, we're going to miss the unfolding of the rest of the Bible, why it matters. And that's a big claim, but it's what we're going to see. Okay, so he's going to spend his life and then the life of his children building empires, building towers, building nations, building wealth, building power and authority and glory to try to reverse the curse that Noah gave to him or cast onto him. So let's look at Genesis. I'm going to read the first 20 verses of chapter 10. Now listen, it's going to be a lot of names. If you know how to really pronounce these, that's fine. I'm just going to make it up as best I can. There's 81 names in this section. So we're going to go through it, and then I'll tell you why this is so important. These are the family records of Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. They also had sons after the flood. So that's just saying the world continued. They continued to procreate. They continued to follow Jehovah's command to be fruitful and multiply. All right, so in verse 2, Japheth's sons, Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, and Tiras. Gomer's sons, Ashkenaz, Riphath, and Togarmah. And Javan's sons, Elisha, Tarshish. That's a very important name that's going to come up here whenever we get to Jonah. Kittim and Dodanim. From these descendants, the peoples of the coasts and islands spread out into their lands according to their clans and their nations, each with its own language. Ham's sons, here we go, here's really the meat that I want to talk about here. Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. Cush's sons, Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Rama, and Sabteka, and Rama's sons, Sheba and Dedan. Cush fathered Nimrod, who began to be powerful in the land. He was a powerful hunter in the sight of the Lord, and that is why it is said, like Nimrod, a powerful hunter in the sight of the Lord. That's a very obvious connection there. Verse 10, his kingdom, here we go, started with what? Babylon, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. From that land he went to Assyria and he built Nineveh, Rehoboth-ir, Calais, and Rezin between Nineveh and the great city Calais. Mizraim fathered the people of Lud, Anam, Lehab, Naphtu, and Pathros, Caslu. The Philistines came from them, and Caphtor. Canaan fathered Sidon, his firstborn, and Heth, as well as the Jebusites, the Amorites, the Girgashites, the Hivites, the Arkites, the Sinites, the Arvadites, the Zemarites, and the Hamathites. Afterward, the Canaanite clans scattered. The Canaanite border went from Sidon, going toward Gerar, as far as Gaza, and going toward Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboim, as far as Lasha. These are Ham's sons by their clans, according to their languages in their lands and their nations. There we go. 81 names. And again, I've heard so many people, as I worked with teenagers, it's really difficult to teach a section like this and for them to understand why God would include it in his holy word. Okay, so as we look at God's word as a whole, every word, right, we see in 2 Timothy, is God-breathed and inspired and is useful. So every word is useful and profitable for doctrine, for teaching doctrine, for reproof, for correction, and for instruction in righteousness. That means these words are profitable for us. And I heard so many people say, why? What does this matter? What are all these ites and these names and these crazy things? Well, look at this. We can trace, and I'm not going to show you every one. I gave you all my research, condensed version of it there. You can trace every one of these names to somewhere on this map. The sons of Ham and the grandsons and the great-grandsons of Ham, they went out into this world and they absolutely conquered the known world. They created the first empire, Mesopotamia. We call that in history, if you remember history, if you like history, the cradle of civilization, all the way to some of the greatest like Babylon. right? And so let's look at just a couple of these, because his empire spread south into Africa, all the way from Somalia to Tunisia and Libya and Algeria, all the way over here into Iran, into Nepal, into these places, all the way north into Turkey, all the way north over here into Armenia. His children built empires that spread everywhere. So what was he doing? Now the Bible doesn't explicitly say this, but I believe it was when a man tells his son, you're not going to amount to anything. That's his son saying, don't bet on that. I'm going to do everything that I can. I'm going to work so hard. I'm going to reverse this curse. I'm going to break this curse. I'm going to build the greatest empires this world has ever seen. And he did that. And we're going to look at how the curse applied to him later. But Cush, the first son of Canaan, was Cush. That's the ancient kingdom of Ethiopia. We learned that, and that was a powerful kingdom for many, many, many years. And I'm not going to read through all of these because you can see. I'll read just occasionally if I see one of a lot of importance. Seba, the son of Cush, he created this group called the Sabaeans, this tribe called the Sabaeans, and they spread between the Horn of Africa and the Arabian Peninsula. So we can't see it on the map, it'll be down here. From where you see Ethiopia, Somalia, and the Horn of Africa, over into like Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Oman, that area over there. So you're like, well, why is this important? Because that group right there, the Sabaeans, we read about in the book of Job. They come and they sack and they take all of Job's servants. They kill all of Job's servants, and we see and carry his livestock away. What we're going to see is that people from the nation, the cursed kingdom and legend and legacy of Ham, they would be a constant thorn in the side of Israel on every single side. So we see that. Let's go down. We're going to see in verse 8. This is where it starts to get really interesting. Cush fathered Nimrod, who began to be powerful in the land. Now, Nimrod, let's talk about him a little bit. What is if you call someone a Nimrod today, what does that mean? Is that typically a compliment? No, it means a dunce, an idiot. I mean, what a Nimrod, right? That's a person that what a fool, right? But in this world that it was written, that his name means rebellion. So that's what Nimrod means. It means rebellion. Again, this is just a picture of him rebelling against the curse, rebelling against the God that would allow Noah to give that curse. And so he became a powerful, powerful person. Enough that his name became synonymous with power. Nimrod, a powerful hunter before the Lord. That was a saying in that time. His kingdom started with what? In verse 10, with Babylon. His kingdom started with Babylon. The series isn't called Babylon, but eventually, what happens to Babylon?
They take over, take captive the Jewish people.
They do, and so we're gonna see this eventually. But so they start in Genesis chapter 11, if you keep reading, by building a tower, the Tower of Babel, and that's the first time where they shook their fist at God and said, "We will conquer. We will be higher than the heavens. We will build something of lasting importance." Eventually, there'll be a thorn in the side of Israel. They'll take Judah and Benjamin into captivity for 70 years. So that comes from this line. Erech and Akkad, that's Uruk and Akkad in history, powerful cities in the Sumerian Empire. Then we drop down here into verse 11. From that land he went to Assyria. Okay, we're looking in this area right here. So here is Israel. If you can see, I know it's hard for everybody to see, but right here on this line, that's Israel. It extends from about there to about there. And over here is Assyria. That's where Nineveh is. So there's a good 500 miles between them. So he traveled a long distance and started some incredible... Well, their family started up here in Turkey. But started these incredible places. So we see this, the land of Nineveh. From that land, he went to Assyria and he built Nineveh. Now this would be... again, an important name throughout history. We're not going to read about it until, I don't know, probably 3,000 years from this point. But eventually Nineveh becomes the capital of this Assyrian empire that's absolutely going to conquer the known world. It's going to be the most powerful empire. And I'm not just speaking biblically, I'm speaking historically. So we know everything about this empire. There's so much evidence about it. The city of Nineveh today is in the city of Mosul, Iraq. So it's on the outskirts so that when you look at geography today, and that area of the world is still in turmoil and conflict. And it has been for the several 5,000 years since this happened, but it all started there with a man named Nimrod founding this city of Nineveh. Let's look. There's a couple more. Mizraim, if you keep following in verse 13, Mizraim. That name doesn't probably mean anything to you, but it actually is the name of the people of Egypt. That was the ancient name for Egypt. So Mizraim went south into Egypt, and within a few hundred years, created an empire that would take the people of Israel captive, put them into slavery for 400 years. So again, they're thorns in the side of Israel. Then you go down to some of the sons of Mizraim, Lud, Anam, Lahab, Naphtha, Pathros, Kaslu, and Kaphtor. All these would become a coalition of city-states that would form what we call the Philistines, right? Are all these names hopefully familiar to you when we talk about the end result? Who was the most famous warrior of the Philistines? Goliath of Gath, right? He was a man that was almost 9 feet tall, or a little bit above 9 feet tall, and he came from this family. You can see this man that was cursed, Ham. He determined, I will not be a slave of my younger brothers and my older brother. I will not. So he forged this empire in direct rebellion to what Noah had cursed him. And then you get down to Canaan, his son that was actually named in the curse, right? And he had all I call them the ites, right? All those Girgashites and Arvites and Amorites and all these different people. But they became the Canaanites, right? And the Canaanites were the people, again, that would be a collection of tribes and kingdoms that would be a physical and spiritual threat to Israel. And so where did the Canaanites inhabit? We're going to really test your knowledge of geography.
They were in certain land of Israel.
Yeah, they were in Israel. They had taken Israel while Israel was in captivity in Egypt, and so they had to drive them out one by one. They had to force all of these people out. So you see, every son of Ham, every grandson, every great-grandson forged an empire, forged a city, forged a tribe that would continually be a thorn in the side of Israel. Okay, that's all the historical stuff, so I won't bore you anymore, even though this is the most fascinating thing in the world to me. I love history. If Mindy's in here, she'd be going like this. Let's get to something practical here. Okay, so right at the heart of all this, you look at this. Everywhere, in every direction, Ham's empire spread. South into Africa, east into Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, north into Turkey, this way into the Horn. Into the north part of Africa. Every direction his empire went. But the most important city that we're going to read in this entire section is the city of Nineveh. That was in the center of it all. It was the most important, it's the most powerful city that he is going to create. It's by 3000 BC, it's already a very, very powerful city. You're talking in the midst of the Iron Age, where nobody had very big cities. All right, so in the book of Jonah, finally got there. Not for long. But in chapters 1, 3, and 4, it's called the Great City. The Great City. And then he also calls it in chapter 3, an extremely great city. So it's very important. In Nahum, it's called the City of Blood. So that takes a decidedly more ominous tone. But a more accurate name, as I study through this whole thing, and I'm presenting this to you, is the Cursed City. It came from Ham's curse, and eventually it became a curse. So how does all this relate to us? Let's make this intensely practical to outweigh the intensely academic from the first part. Number one, the Cursed City points us to Jesus. The Cursed City points us to Jesus. Dr. Adrian Rogers, one of my favorite preachers of all time, he was a pastor in Tennessee. So he said this: there is a road from every verse that will take us to Jesus. So that's what I'm teaching here. So the Cursed City points us to Jesus. So Ham lived under a curse. His family, whole family line was cursed. What did he try to do about it?
Well, he tried to excel.
Yeah.
Just in defiance to his father.
Yeah, good, defiance, that's a great word, thank you, I'm going to steal that. Defiance to his father, so he was told you'll be a slave, and he tried to rise above that in defiance to his father. I love that. All right, so he worked at this. He worked to erase this curse. He fought. He tried his best. And the truth is that you and I today, every person that's ever existed, are under a curse. Right? Ever since Eve's teeth pierced the skin of that fruit, Every single one of us are born with a sin nature inside of us. And what do we try to do today? We try to work. We try to work to fight this curse. We try to do good things. And I've heard this all the time. How about every funeral I've ever been to, you hear somebody, they say about the man or a woman who's deceased, he was a good person. She was a good person, right? What we mean with that is they took care of their family, or they were likable. I've known some people, I'm like, they're lying. That person was not a good person. I don't know who they're talking about, but that's not the guy I knew. But I would never say that at a funeral though. But as we're looking at this is what we try to do. We try, even in churches, we try to do our best. We think, well, if I'm a good person and God would be pleased with me, I can erase this curse. We've tried and tried and tried, but the truth is we can't. This curse goes deeper than ourselves. It's in our souls. And so we're the same as Ham and his lineage. All these empires, this massive collection of empires that he built, where are they now? They're dust. They're ruins. They're records in history. Not one of these cities. Nineveh, the great city, the extremely great city. It's a pile of ruins. It's dust and ashes. It's pages in a history book. I guarantee you, if we went to the middle school and asked how many people know about the kingdom of Assyria, they'd say, I don't know. Where is that? Is that in Canada? I don't know. Right? So it's nothing. It came to nothing. Babylon was completely destroyed and devoured. Every nation that has rose up has eventually met its end. So that's the end of someone who tries to fight this kind of curse. We can't win. We can't win against sin. We can't do this on our own. And you're like, Pastor, give me some hope here. All right, I'll give you some hope, because there was a man who did win on our behalf, who came and lived the perfect life that we could not live, who did exactly what he was intended to do. He lived in his spiritual Nineveh completely without sin. I think about that almost daily, how Christ made it through this world without one time. I give an example for men, you'll understand. Not one time did he look at a woman with lust in his heart. How? You know how we're men. You know how we're wired. You're like, well, I'm older. Those impulses maybe aren't so strong anymore. Well, just think about when you were 31, right? But think about never once did he look. Never once did he look at his mother and speak a harsh word back to her in defiance. Now I've seen that picture. I don't know if you've ever seen that little comic where it's Jesus as a toddler, and he's standing on top of the water in the bathtub, and she's like, Jesus, get in the bath, right? And so he's standing there like that. But it's just a joke, but there was never a moment when he looked at his parents and spouted off to them. There was never a moment when he had enough anger in his heart to cause him to sin. There was never a moment when anything happened that he would break even the littlest command of God. And he did that to do what we couldn't do, live that perfect life. And then it says in Galatians chapter 3, verse 3, it says, he became a curse for us so that we could become his righteousness. I'm going to read that. I read that incorrectly. Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us. So he took on all that curse entailed. The slavery of it, the guilt of it, the shame of it, the guilt, the sin and the death and the destruction of it. And he said, I'll take that. I'll take that. And what did he offer us in return?
His righteousness.
Righteousness. What a horrible trade. You think about what a terrible trade. That's not fair, Jesus. You took all the worst that I have to offer, and you gave me all the best that you had. That he who knew no sin became sin, so that we could become the righteousness of God. More than that, more than just redeeming us. Now he says, you're part of a new family. Your old family was cursed. You're cursed through Adam. But now if you come to faith in Christ, you're in my family. I've adopted you as sons and daughters. You're my brothers and sisters now. What an amazing thing. So this all points us to Christ. This curse imagery points us to the one, the only one who could beat this curse for us. So it points us to Jesus. Number 2, the cursed city also points us to our purpose. I want you to look at this map again. I'm going to try to put it in a way. Purpose, yes. I'm going to put this right in front of me here. Okay, so look at this. In every direction. I don't know. I mean, I know we all can't see, but in every direction. Okay, so Israel's here. This is Egypt. Down here is Cush or Ethiopia. Over here is Libya. This over here is Babylon to the southeast, and Assyria here. I'm trying to see geography upside down. Turkey is up here. There's some kingdoms. Canaanites were in here. I mean, all of this. So in every direction was all these cursed places. These anti-God, anti-biblical places. And where did he put his people? His redeemed, chosen people.
Right in the middle.
Up in Scotland, up in England, like away from all this garbage. We put it right in the middle. Every direction. Lord, over there, there's an enemy. Over there, there's an enemy. Over there, there's enemies all around us. Why on earth did he do this? Could he have put them in Australia? Yeah, he could have planted them there, but he wanted them in the midst of this turmoil and this chaos and this volatile place for two reasons. One, to show these people that he was glorious and powerful. There is no reason, historical reason, how Israel lasted as long as they did. They shouldn't have. They should have been swept away decades, centuries, millennia before then. But God proved himself faithful and powerful. He showed these nations around. In one, we're not going to study it in this series. Maybe if I do a series on Babylon, right? But the Babylonian army comes. No, it was Nineveh, the Assyrians. They come and they threaten the king, and God says, just be patient. And they're camped outside the city, and God comes and kills like 200,000 of them in one night. Right? He's proven himself powerful. He's showing each of these nations, you will not win unless I let you. Right? You will not conquer my people. They're protected under the glorious name of Jehovah or of Yahweh. And so that's part of it. But also the other part of it too, he planted his people to be a witness to all the nations around of his love and his mercy. You read through the law and you see that there is so much room for people of other nations to come into the house of Israel. He invites them, and you see it frequently. You see the story of Ruth. Ruth was from Moab, one of the enemy nations, and she was welcomed into Israel. You see it in the story of Rahab. She was a prostitute. She was a Canaanite. And what happened? She was welcomed into the people. There was a group called the Gibeonites, right? And they were enemies of Israel. They were slated for destruction, and they did some trickery, but they got in, and then they made it into the people of God. He was showing them, I will welcome anybody who comes in faith. I will welcome any nation, any people, and what he wants from this, you know why he placed them there, is because one day around the throne of God, there will be people from every tribe, and every tongue, and every language, and every nationality. Everybody. You know what? There's going to be people from Assyria around that throne of God because of what Jonah did. Now, unwillingly did, but he did it, right? So that's the idea. And so that, to me, when I connect it back to us, this is why God doesn't remove us from our situation. And he prayed this. I think I talked to you about that last week. He prayed, I don't ask that you remove them from the world. I just pray that you keep them from the evil one. He placed us in the midst of our Nineveh for this reason, to show how God is powerful. Your stories matter. You know, I love that somebody mentioned about that we love hanging out with old people because they have great stories. That's the truth. But your stories matter. The story of how you came to faith in Christ matters. You know, it was the story of how my dad came to faith that led me to the Lord. When he shared his testimony, God pierced my heart, and I gave my heart to Christ. Your stories really matter. They show God's glory in this place, but he also placed you where we are in the midst of our Nineveh for a reason, to be a witness to the people around you. That's why he told us, the last thing he told us on earth, you will be my witnesses, both in Judea, or Jerusalem, from here, in Judea, this little area, Samaria, right, over here, or above in that area, right, and then he just straight goes to the uttermost parts of the world. Just expand out. He said, I want you to go and make disciples. He placed you to be a witness to the people around us. So as we live in Nineveh, I know it's going to get worse. I'm not going to give you hope on that regard. I pray daily that we will see more legislation against abortion. I pray that we will see it ended in our lifetime, the free access to it. I pray that we will see some moral resolutions, but the truth is we can't legislate morality. Even if we put laws in place, it doesn't change people's hearts. But we know that in us, and the Spirit of Christ in us, compels us and gives us this message of reconciliation, where we go to the world, like 2 Corinthians says, and we proclaim, be reconciled to God. That's our mission, why we're here, why God leaves us in our Nineveh.